few years ago, I happened to meet a new neighbor who said she was interested in exploring some hiking trails in our neighborhood, and I told her where she could find a trail, but she wasn't able to picture it, so I said, just come with me and I'll show you the way. So on the very first lovely day of spring, we found ourselves on one of my very favorite trails. The trees and bushes were just beginning to leaf out, and my new friend wanted to know what we were looking at. So I named every species I could for her. There was black oak, white oak, ponderosa pine, juniper, ceanothus, incense cedar. When we got to the cedar, she told me that in India, where she's from, the cedar tree is considered a symbol of wisdom. She explained that in Hinduism, plants and trees are all believed to hold some kind of spiritual virtue, and therefore they are treated with respect. One would think long and hard before cutting down a cedar tree believed to contain wisdom. Some people might consider this superstition, but it makes sense to me, and it fits right in with my understanding of God the Creator, who breathed sacred breath into all living things, imparting in each of them something of the divine and declaring them good. This is the essence of the very first creation story we have in Genesis, and the followers of all religions who have inherited that particular creation story, so Judaism, Christianity, Islam, we all learn from the story that life is sacred. As I learned from my new Hindu friend, we are not alone in our understanding. Some truths are known to all traditions. Walking that trail while sharing botany and theology with a Hindu friend reinforced to me that God communicates to all of us in ways we can understand, and that transcends any one particular language or any one particular religion, which makes sense. The world God so loved is simply too big for uniformity. Our very ecosystems teach us this. What grows in my forest is much different from what grows across the planet, say in India. Even our cedar trees are different, adapted as they are for the conditions where they must grow. I would expect nothing less from the tree of wisdom. It's obvious to us that cedar trees are shaped by their environments, and we would never think to judge the cedar trees of other ecosystems or call them wrong. They all have the wisdom to thrive where they are, and when conditions change, they have the wisdom to adapt accordingly, given enough time and circumstance. And yet, humans are sometimes quick to judge others of our own species who populate this wonderfully diverse world of God's creation. We learn of people who eat differently, dress differently, speak differently, or worship differently, but instead of marveling at the ways in which humans have adapted to thrive in all kinds of conditions, we compare. These are not like us, we say, and if we are binary thinkers, we decide that one way must be right and all other ways wrong. We do this to validate our own ways, and it pleases us when we are given license to do so from a higher authority. I love it when the experts endorse my choices, like when I learned that my preferred diet is commended by the American Heart Association, or when the Surgeon General recommends health practices that I've already embraced. Yes, I think I am nailing it. And then there's Jesus, validating me for following him, who is, after all, the way, the truth, and the life. Doesn't that just settle it then? Everyone, in fact, should just be a Christian like me, and things would go so much better. Except history has proven to us that this isn't the case. Historically, we have seen how some of the greatest violence has been perpetrated by Christians, armed with swords and marching a bloody path into lands populated with people they were eager to kill in Jesus' name. Was that what Jesus meant for his followers to do in the interest of saving the world so beloved to God? Well, clearly not everyone who identifies as Christian acts the part, whether in historical or modern times. You might even know someone who claims to be a Christian but mostly seems to miss the point of Jesus' teachings. It happens. It's easier to claim to follow Jesus' way than to actually follow Jesus' way, which, as it turns out, is a pretty hard way to follow. So we can agree that you can call yourself a Christian and fail to follow Jesus' way. But is the opposite also true? Can you not call yourself a Christian and yet somehow manage to follow Jesus' way? This is a huge question with as many nuances of answer as there are nuances of theological thought. I do not claim to have the intellectual or spiritual capacity to have the definitive answer, if indeed there is one, but this is a question we must engage given our gospel lesson today, which has been used over the centuries to affirm various answers to that question. I'm going to read it to you now in bite-sized pieces. It's the beginning of John's 14th chapter, someone's recollection of Jesus' farewell discourse to his disciples. And this is what he told them as they sat together at the table on the evening of his arrest. Hear Jesus' words of comfort to his closest friends. Do not let your hearts be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house there are many dwelling places. If it were not so, would I told you that I go to prepare a place for you. When I go to prepare a place for you, I will return and take you to be with me, so that where I am, there you may be also. You know the way to the place where I am going. Read superficially, this passage has often been understood to refer to heaven, some physical place where Jesus invites his followers to spend their afterlife. However, a deeper understanding of the fourth gospel in its entirety reveals that Jesus' reference to his Father's house is not meant to be a synonym for heaven. Interesting. Repeatedly, Jesus has both said and shown that he is in the Father and the Father is in him. That's called indwelling. And Jesus helps his disciples to understand this mutual indwelling through the metaphor of physical location. The metaphor of God's house, then, is about relationship. Jesus is in a deeply intimate relationship with God, and in the metaphorical house of this relationship, there is room to spare. There is room for all of them, and because of Jesus' teachings, they know the way to that beautiful place of relationship with God. But as usual, Jesus' metaphor is lost on his literal-minded disciples. We're told, picking up verse 5, Thomas said to him, Lord, we do not know where you are going. How, then, can we know the way? Thomas is asking for a map. He wants the GPS coordinates of God's house so he can track Jesus down. But just like in English, the Greek word for the way, horos, can mean either a physical road or a metaphorical way of life. Guess which one Jesus meant? In verse 6, he answers, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. If you know me, you will know my Father also. From now on, you do know him and have seen him. That right there is the heart of John's gospel, and it has been used by some Christians as a way of asserting superiority over all other religions. But that was neither the point of John's gospel nor of Jesus' words. John's gospel was written for a particular community of Jesus' followers who had been ousted from the Jewish community to where they had belonged. They were looking for a new spiritual home, a dwelling place where they could be safe. And John's gospel taught them that they had found this home through Jesus, whose life and ministry had shown them the Father. For them, knowing Jesus was the way to engage in relationship with God. The writer of this gospel was not addressing followers of other world religions, of which he likely had minimal knowledge in the information vacuum that was the first century. All this writer knew and all he cared to share was that Jesus was the way for his people to know God. Remember, it wasn't all about gaining access to the afterlife. This coming to the Father was about relationship with God as revealed to them through Jesus. It was a particular message for a particular audience, which is how Jesus himself had meant it. Remember, he was speaking to an even smaller audience, to his closest circle of friends, when he reminded them that they already knew the way to the Father because he had shown it to them. To them and to them alone, Jesus had shown the way, the truth, and the life. Yes, they would go on to teach others what they had learned, but in that very moment, it was Thursday night of the Passover week. They were among the only people in the world who had been taught the way of Jesus, that particular way of being in relationship with God. When Jesus told them, no one comes to the Father except through me, he meant none of you come to the Father except through me. He was by no means condemning the rest of the world to fail at having relationship with God. He meant that for his own followers, he was the way. This is Jesus giving his followers their final pep talk, a reminder of their identity, and metaphorically, a roadmap for how to live their lives. Continue along the path of Jesus. That was their way. And that is what they called themselves initially, those early followers. They called themselves people of the way. Was Jesus' way the only way? Well, for them it was. Engaging in deep relationship with a loving God, following the pattern of Jesus' own life and work, that was the way to abundant life for them and their community. Jesus' way was both truth and life for those who knew him. But what about for those who didn't know Jesus? He lived primarily in one place for just over 3 decades, a short life in a small, out-of-the-way province. And I am so very grateful that his followers took it upon themselves, even risking life and limb, to spread that message to other people in other places, because that is how it is that I have come to know Jesus, and his way has led me into a deep and satisfying relationship with God and with the world so beloved to God. My effort to follow Jesus is what transforms me day by day by day into a better expression of myself, doing my best to participate in the kingdom building work that defined Jesus' life, all because Jesus showed a few people the way. But what about all the other people all over the world? How would they know the way? This is the idea that has motivated missionaries to travel to the furthest reaches of planet Earth, sharing the way of Jesus Christ, so that people everywhere could know the truth of God's will as expressed by Jesus himself, that all should have life and have it abundantly. Sometimes this message landed like soft rain on parched soil. But some followers of Jesus' way found that people they met already had their own relationship with the divine, and it too was life-giving. In the early 1800s, a Christian man named John Stewart felt called to share his faith with the native Wyandot people of Ohio. He lived among them for years, and he did lead some to Christianity, but when he asked the entire Wyandot community to give up their ancestral religion and adopt the Christian faith, Wyandot chief John Hicks said to him, "My friend, I feel called on to arise in defense of the religion of my fathers. The Great Spirit has given his red children a religion to guide their feet and to establish them in the good way. We are contented with it because it suits our conditions and is adapted to our capacities. Cast your eyes over the world and you will see that the Great Spirit has given to every nation a religion suited to their condition, and these all differ. Is this not the work of the Great Spirit?" That is the question at the heart of the matter, is it not? Is God's message to the world confined to one person in one place at one time, or has God been at work in the world, in all places throughout all of time, entering into relationship with people attuned to the divine voice? Is Jesus the only way for everybody, or just his particular followers? A Hindu professor addressed this question in a sermon preached once at a Christian seminary. Commenting on this one-way passage, she said, "This verse is absolutely true. Jesus is the only way." And he continued, that way of dying to an old way of being and being born into a new way of being, it is known in all the religions of the world. As it turns out, the way of Jesus is a universal way, though millions who follow that way have not heard of Jesus. It seems that God has been at work in the world, even outside of first century Galilee. The Wyandot chief would have agreed, and although I am not at liberty to speak on behalf of Jesus, I think he would have found any number of wise people to be stimulating conversation partners. I do wish that the world could have been more accessible to Jesus so that we could have some record of his thoughts on other faith traditions. If I could arrange a panel interview of people from any time or place, I would love to invite Jesus and the Buddha and Gandhi, and that is the very short list. That being said, for me, Jesus is absolutely the way. In seeing Jesus through the stories of his life and his teachings, I am convinced that I have seen the heart of God, the way, the truth, and the life as imagined by the creator of this world. But I do believe that this creator has also found ways to be seen by more than just a handful of first century Galileans. I do believe that our creator continues to be made known even now in these times as we wrestle with questions of how to survive in the face of pending ecological disaster, and how to lovingly establish justice in a world seething with injustice and hatred. I pray that all people everywhere, regardless of faith tradition, are giving serious thought to the urgent questions of our time. because we simply do not have time to sit around arguing about who has the best understanding of God. Not only is that unproductive, it is dangerous. In the words of the 20th century philosopher Isaiah Berlin, it is a terrible and dangerous arrogance to believe that you alone are right, that you have a magical eye which sees the truth, and others cannot be right if they disagree. This makes it certain that there is one way and one way only, and that it is worth any amount of suffering, particularly on the part of other people, if only the way prevails. Of suffering, the world has seen enough. Of healing, we are in need. When we focus only upon our religious and theological differences, we simply limit our capacity to do God's work in the world. So instead of arguing over how to interpret the events of the past, we must identify the way forward, the way of truth and life, the way that aligns with our Creator's will for the flourishing of all creation. And we must take that way together, regardless of how we choose to label it. I will call it Jesus' way, but if you use different shorthand for it, that is not a problem for me. What interests me more is working together to find solutions for the things that are breaking our collective hearts. Wherever we go to find wisdom, whatever we see when we look at a cedar tree, however we experience God, let us all become people of the way of healing for this world that God, in spite of everything, still loves. To my Christian friends, may the peace of Christ be with you. To my Hindu friends, namaste. And as we continue the process of reflection in order to find our story and see how God has been at work in our lives, here are the questions I invite you to think about this week. What are your most important values and why? And what or who is the origin of these? Also, maybe tell about a time in your life when you have been challenged to think in a new way. Wherever you are in your faith journey, I pray that you find the way that leads to truth, life, and wholeness.